welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're continuing to talk about Season 3, Episode 18 with host Steve Martin and musical guests, the Blues Brothers. This is part 2.
Part 2, baby.
Of our podcast. We're picking up right where we left off last time, talking about this phenomenal episode of SNL. If you haven't listened to part 1, do yourself a favor and go back and listen to that. We have a phenomenal interview in that episode, and then come back and listen to the rest of it here.
So much to talk about. Let's just get right to it.
Here we go. Jumping in, part 2, the rest of Season 3, Episode 18. We roll right into another classic sketch.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
So this one starts at a bar, and you see Steve sitting at the bar, lighting a cigarette, and then we see a bunch of patrons, writers, and everybody on the set. And Gilda's at a table with Brian Doyle Murray. All of a sudden, Steve and Gilda make eye contact, and there's no dialogue, and they just break into this beautiful dance, which then goes through the crowd and sets up the Dancing in the Dark sketch. Fortunately, we have a 3-time Emmy winner. She's one of the original writers of Saturday Night Live. And she wrote this sketch, Dancing in the Dark. Marilyn Suzanne Miller, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you. And I'd just like to talk about how many Emmys I have, which is a billion. I don't know how many.
We wanted to lead off with that right off the bat.
There are a gabillion, because I started, and that's really how I know Lauren from L.A. I started with Jim Brooks. That's a horrible turn of phrase. Started with. Right after college, I went to the University of Michigan. I had seen the Mary Tyler Moore show in college, and I had liked it, and I mean, I knew it was a really good thing. And so one day, I picked up the phone and figured out how to call Studio City and say the words, "Is Jim Brooks in?"
That's amazing.
I knew how to say those words, but I didn't know who to say them to. But he was. And I said, hey, I sort of wrote the script, and it was very much sort of a script. And I'm supposed to go to grad school, and, I can't afford it. I must have thrown in somewhere. Anyway, Jim and Gary Marshall arranged for me to go to L.A. and work on The Odd Couple to earn some money as a junior writer. And they hired me ultimately after I was there and had a place to live. And that's how I got to the business.
You wrote for Mary Tyler Moore show, right? And Rhoda?
I wrote for a gabillion of those. A gabillion. I mean, I wrote a Maud, I think. And all those shows were it was a small business, believe it or not. And they all knew each other. So I wrote for Welcome Back, Kotter, and got to see John Travolta begin his career in show business. And I wrote a lot of stuff out there. And one of the things I wanted to do was something other than sitcoms and pilots, i.e., I admired Richard Pryor, and I admired Lily Tomlin, and my agents didn't want me to do those shows. That was a whole other world of variety. But I went in anyway. I got an interview. The only thing of which I remember is Lily asking me what my sign was. So that gives you some idea of the period that this was going on. And that's how I met Lauren.
On the Lily Tomlin special, right?
On the Lily Tomlin special.
Yeah.
And worked with him for quite a long time. But it was a huge staff, and it was a huge pre-production period. And that's how I got to know Lauren, and he got to know what I wrote.
Wow.
It's funny you mentioned it was a small world. Coming into Saturday night, you were the only person, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, other than Herb Sargent, who actually had written on
that
a TV
is
show, right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
They had to make a deal with the guild. Oh, you have this late night Saturday show. You know, they had rates that they were paying the Tonight Show writers. And they had to figure out, you know, what rates to use to pay somebody like Herb and I, who had written before, and Saturday night had never been used at 11:30 to be a place that had a price assigned to it.
Interesting.
Oh, right. Okay.
Did you initially turn Lorne down when he offered you Saturday night?
Oh, boy. I turned Lorne down about 1 billion times. Because I was living with this guy who my parents came out to L.A. to meet. So I figured, well, I ought to just marry him and stay in L.A. I want to stay in L.A. You know, I had grown up on Long Island, and my family was in New Jersey and New York, and that wasn't home.
So what happened for you to get nudged? Like, what made you turn around and accept the offer to come on the show?
Not only because of the nature of what they were doing, but I knew everybody here.
Right.
Like, I knew Franken and Davis from the minute they walked into the Comedy Store in L.A. And did their act. Of course, Michael and Ann. Oh, Rosie wrote on the Lily Show, Rosie Schuster.
Right.
So I knew Rosie. I knew Lorraine because she was a cast member on the Lily Show. I knew some of the people, a lot of the people. Gilda, who I only knew at a distance, went to the University of Michigan as I did. But she was much older than me, much older. She was older than me, and she would like drop in and out of school. She majored in oral interpretation. Now, I don't know what she planned to orally interpret. But we didn't really know each other, but we did know of each other.
Well, she eventually got to orally interpret scripts that you wrote. But the sketch that she's in this episode that we're talking about, there's no dialogue in Dancing in the Dark. And this then was something that you came up with, and it's a take on a scene from The Bandwagon, a Fred Astaire film?
Yes, but I didn't know much about The Bandwagon. The two principals in it, Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse, I only saw like one time.
And it must have stuck with you.
Well, it did, because Fred Astaire was treated like terribly by, you know, everybody. He was like this old guy to Sid Charisse and to others involved in the show, in this Broadway show they were making up. And he and Sid Charisse were far apart in age. But in any event, he didn't get to go. Let's get back to us. People stuck at NBC didn't get to go to any place. And one of the things we would do is hear about what life was like in New York. And one of the things was that on 1st or 2nd Avenue, there were a whole bunch of what were known as singles bars. That was already like, you know, we didn't get to go to such fabulous places.
Right.
And there was a place called Maxwell's Plum. I hope I'm right about that. That was very well known. And people would go there and they'd drink and they'd smoke and they'd dance and they'd meet each other and pick each other up and, you know, either fall in love or go to the next person. But all I ever knew about these places is that I heard what I just got them saying, but I never got to go to one. And Pat Birch, who was in the original West Side Story and a brilliant woman, dancer and choreographer, was familiar with something about Steve Martin, Happy Feet, which was his tap dancing. Mm-hmm. He made up this form of tap dancing that was really what it was. It was sort of this kind of ooky. It was great. I mean, he was great at it, but it was very specifically Steve's invention. What it was what I imagined could happen if two Happy Feet-esque people met at Maxwell Plum, this singles bar. And the only idea was that Pat Birch knew about Happy Feet, and here these two people would meet in this bar.
So you and Pat Birch then came up with this idea, and you had the idea and kind of talked to Pat Birch about how to make this happen. Is that right?
Yeah, I said to Pat, you know how Steve does that Happy Feet kind of tap dancing? And so we put it in a singles bar. And I just asked her to create a circumstance where these two people, as others did in that bar, they're dancing in the bar, that they find each other in that bar. And when the music of Dancing in the Dark comes up, it overrides what's playing on the jukeboxes in the singles bar. The whole idea of chance, and that you could meet a guy if you went to one of these places who would be just right for you, was really the underscoring of my thinking about this. Well, why bother with it? What would be the chance?
Did you come up with it this week, the week when Steve was there, or had you had it previous and you're waiting for him to come back?
Everything, I told somebody this story of when I came up with Slumber Party, which was, where the girls go to a slumber party and they all tell each other how babies are made.
Yeah, with Madeline Kahn, yeah.
Yeah, and I said it to Lauren, and he just took a card and made it the first one in the show of whatever night that was going to be. And that was sort of what this was. And I thought about the two people that were such big nerds that they had the incredible opportunity of meeting each other in these singles bars that I heard these fabulous things about. That was it.
And it just works so perfect with Steve Martin and Gilda Radner. I mean, I don't know if you don't get a better pairing than those two to do something like this.
This was very different and very specific to who the personalities involved were. You meet a guy and he asks you to dance at a singles bar, which I knew what that was, and that was the result. They both were that.
How did this work throughout production? So when you have this sketch, this idea for a sketch, and you kind of pitch it to Lauren, and he says, yes, let's do it. Then you and Pat Birch are working on this to figure out how the choreography is going to work, or how did it work throughout the week?
Well, there wasn't a throughout the week. There was really, to me, it all happened in a second, because a lot of things did.
Right.
They really did. They happened in a minute. I mean, first of all, there was no time to rehearse. And the one important thing was that the booth, i.e. Dave Wilson, and the guys on the cameras, of which there were 6 cameras, knew what the next dance move was going to be.
Right.
Any time was ever spent on that sketch in terms of the enacting of it, other than, each of them learning that dance. The most important thing about it was that Davey knew where to send the cameras. You see the cameras even in the shot.
Yeah. Well, they covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
And then it just builds so well. It's funny. It's, we mentioned, like Gary mentioned, there's no dialogue in this sketch, but it's constructed so brilliantly. It takes a full minute. I was watching it again. I timed it. It takes a full minute from the start of the sketch before they actually do break that wall of the set. And it's like a very...
Go into the studio. Yeah.
Yeah. And when they first meet, they're dancing very, very reminiscent of Fred Astaire. And it's not until they break that wall and get into the studio proper where they start doing Happy Feet and having fun and enjoy it. So it's just a really, really great buildup of the dance itself.
You have to recall, if you're going to make the comparison with the Fred Astaire thing, Steve is smoking a cigarette, and Pat arranged that he would put it out by, stamping on it. And Gilda, of course, attracted to him as she was, and for him, joined him in the putting a cigarette out her shoe.
Yes, because it just gradually gets funnier and funnier and sillier and sillier. And there's all these like little touches which are really nice. There's a moment when Steve's twirling Gilda around on the home base and he goes to put her down, and it's Gilda who, is, we always say, is so great at physical comedy, struggles to get up and get back on her feet, and everybody laughs. And it builds to the end where Steve's literally carrying her on his side, running through the studio to drop her back off on the table. It builds so great from that opening moments of dancing where it's very sweet and small, and it just gets so big by the end. It's just such a great arc with no dialogue. It's just such a great arc to watch as a sketch.
Thank you. And I have to say that was something that Pat knew. Pat knew how to show, really. And now, this is my interpretation of it. He was showing them really getting closer as the dance goes forward,
Marilyn, I mean, we're talking about how Gilda's physical comedy is so brilliant and she does such a great job in this. Was your immediate thought when you had this idea and knowing that you wanted it to be Steve because of Happy Feet, was it automatically Gilda in your mind who had to do this with him?
I refer back to Michigan and knowing that she was physically capable of following his lead, and certainly knowing that Pat understood what Happy Feet was.
Yeah, it's such a great sketch. And it fits so well in the context of this whole episode, which is such a great episode. We should also say, too, Marilyn is a big part of another big sketch in this episode. Just to mention, Marilyn, the Festrunk Brothers are also characters you helped create.
Oh, right? That's right.
Yeah, I didn't want to let the conversation go without at least mentioning that that's a big part of your work as well in the show.
Yes. Well, the Festrunk Brothers only occurred because the only thing we did was take cabs to work or buses. And it was very much true that the guys driving would say, oh, when I was over in, wherever the hell they were, I used to be fabulous physicist. Now I'm perfectly worth nothing. I have to drive a cab, and so terrible. So I had the proof when Danny came into me. And Danny said, okay, so we'll write this later, and Steve's going to go out to dinner with Lauren, which is always the case with host. And later ended up being 3 a.m.
Oof.
He fell asleep against my wall. We had walls then. That was a big deal. There were years we didn't have walls. It was my office. And so I made up those names. And what was interesting was I'm a part Moroccan. I had an Uncle George from Morocco, came over here. But he was referred to as Georg. For some reason, in America, they called my Uncle George Georg. But he made the choice to call him Jorge. But anyway, I made up the names by myself at the end.
It's awesome. They're such wonderful characters who everyone knows.
They're great.
Yeah.
They were so real. They were, and believe me, when we did it first, Gilda encouraged the sexual aggression. Here they were, free in America, to say, oh, you're big American breasts. They didn't know how to talk, and they could say what they wanted in this country.
Right. Well, Marilyn, thank you for joining us. This is, we're just scratching the surface of everything that you did for the show. All of your contributions, all of your characters. Hopefully, maybe we can do this again sometime and spend more time with you to talk about the breadth of your work, because I think it's fabulous.
Sure. You too, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I'll see
this
you
was great. All right.
And something else we should add about this sketch is when Gilda passed away in 1989, and it was a day, it actually happened to be the season 14 finale, and Steve Martin was hosting. I think everybody knows this, but this is the sketch Steve used to remember Gilda that day, like in his monologue came out. And this is the sketch, which I think it just reintroduced it, and almost that more so than Tonight is what has this sketch in people's memory, is Steve doing that in a season 14 finale.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
And it is a great example of Gilda. obviously it makes a lot of sense because Steve was there to show this, but to pick something to highlight Gilda's talents,
Right.
we know she's funny. Like you don't argue that, but like she's funny in a different and stunning way in this sketch.
Yes.
And so I think it's a great encapsulation of what she can do.
We talked about her physical comedy in this, but it's the way in which she blends her physical comedy in an understated way so that you realize what she's doing. She doesn't make it look difficult, but if you look at it, it's difficult what she does.
Yeah.
And it's just so effortless for her, or so it appears.
It's another thing too. We keep mentioning like what's making all of these sketches great are the little things. And that's in this sketch, there's that instance, I think we talked about it again with Marilyn, but where Steve's twirling her around and she fumbles just enough when she can't get back up on her feet that it's funny. It's not over the top. It's just a slight little thing. And it's just so genius. And it's like, that's what all these sketches I've been doing is everything's got a little something to it that just is like cherry on top, just makes an A+.
Yeah. It's so remarkable, especially after last week where anyway. Well, that leads us into Weekend Update, brought to you by Crulex, which promotes jock itch. That made me laugh.
Did it? Really?
It did. Because I didn't know where they were going with it. Just said Crulex, and I was like, what is this? And they introduced themselves as Dave Aykroyd and Gene Curtin.
Still messing up their names.
There were some things in the beginning of this that were okay.
Yeah.
Some of it was just of the time. There was a Marilyn.
They had the art joke that was funny
right.
the stolen artwork, and they get the famous painting.
Yeah.
They tried to do a Steve Martin joke that didn't go over too well.
It did not, no.
But then they bring Garrett out, and Garrett saves the day, baby.
Yes. Garrett comes out because there's been a marijuana alert, and so Dan has arranged for Garrett to go. They don't say where he goes, do they? They just say
no, because I thought he said uptown, but then at the end he mentions midtown, so it's they don't mention
right
because he says I don't want to go back up there. I think Garrett has that line.
Yeah,
I don't want to go up there again.
But they send Garrett to buy marijuana so they could test it, and he comes back and Dan gives him money, and then Dan's like, "Wait, this is there." He starts muttering that it's short. Yeah, he's like it's light.
It's under.
And then Dan apologizes to the audience because they needed a full ounce to run their test. Not
a complete ounce.
Yeah, not 3/4 an ounce.
Not 7/8.
Yeah. I thought that was funny. And you're right. Garrett was very funny in that.
Garrett was very good. I mean, his inflections, his facial expressions, he's really good in this. Great job.
Yeah.
I think the piece didn't hit as well as they wanted to, especially at the end.
Right.
I feel like they wanted it. Maybe it played better in dress, but there was a little bit of a weird something or other where beat fell off, but it's a funny interaction between the two of them, and Garrett is very good.
Yeah, it's good. We get another counterpoint. This one about federal aid for abortions.
They learned their lesson from last week, and they brought back Jane, you ignorant slut.
Yes, they did.
Because go figure, huge response from the audience.
Right,
Jane, you ignorant, misguided slut.
Misguided.
Huge response.
Yes,
yeah,
a bigger response than I would have thought, but.
1978, baby.
Tonight on Point Counterpoint, Jane and I will argue federal aid for abortions. Jane will take the point for federal aid, and I will take the counterpoint against. Jane?
Safe abortions have always been available to the rich, Dan. You simply want to deny them to the poor, and if you succeed, poor women will be forced to get them anyway. They'll be forced back into the alleys with hangers, plungers, and vacuum cleaners, risking death or mutilation. But you'd like that, wouldn't you, Dan? You sadistic, elitist, sexist, racist, anti-humanist pig.
Jane, you ignorant, misguided slut. Once again, you missed the point entirely. Why should I pay hard-earned tax dollars so welfare tarts can have sex anytime they want without regard to consequences? Haven't these bimbos heard of abstinence? I myself haven't had sex for 2 years and I'm rich. Why should I foot the bill for killing unborn infants anyway? Now, I'll pay for something practical like sterilization, but abortions, never, with one exception. If I'd been around when your mother was carrying you, not only would I have paid for the abortion, but I would have performed it myself.
It got dark.
Yeah, I guess.
But it was still funny. I still think it's funny. It got really dark, but I still think it's funny.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I guess I didn't take it as dark in the moment because I just...
You don't think him saying, I don't believe in abortions except for going back and and aborting you before you were born. Okay.
I just thought it was funny.
Okay. Yes, it was. It was very funny.
I see what you're saying, though. I thought it got dark when they came back and said that Garrett Morris had been found dead.
Another Paquat-related death.
Yes.
Great callback that I don't think anybody got, at least in the audience. No one got the ex-police reference.
Right.
I thought it was hilarious.
Yes.
I don't even love those sketches that much, and I thought this was a hilarious callback. Though.
Yeah, I thought that was funny. And that was a weekend update. It was pretty fast, but it was tight.
It was pretty good. Yeah, very tight. And overall, I mean, again, I think everyone's riding high. You're just loving this episode so much.
Right.
But I think it's good. Everyone's good in it.
Yeah. And it was relatively short for a weekend update. But we're still not done with classic sketches on this episode. That's how insanely overloaded this episode is.
I know.
Right?
Possibly haven't even gotten to the biggest moment of the show yet.
No.
Arguably the most well-known moment of this show.
Okay. That's probably true.
For casual SNL fans, like, what do you remember your top whatevers of, say, the early days of Saturday Night? I guarantee you most people would say King Tut.
Yes. I agreed. And that's why a lot of people get confused whether or not Steve Martin was a cast. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, we get King Tut, which I believe was written by Steve.
Yeah. The story of this song is funny. I mean, yeah, Steve wrote this and had actually recorded this song before he came to the show, but had never performed it, hadn't done it yet, and came to the show with the idea of like, maybe we could put this on. Maybe I could do this number. Wasn't expecting a whole lot. And it was Lorne who really got behind it and was like, yes, and told the wardrobe department and the art department, go all out, do everything you can. And I mean, they do. It's another amazing set. The costumes are great. And, this is what really propels him in this King Tut, I think, to the levels it does. It hadn't come out yet. Nobody's seen it yet. That's the thing you got to remember. No one has seen this ever.
Right.
Before this moment.
And Steve's performance is so good. And the way, I mean, he's good. Like you said, his costume is outstanding, but then the dancing that he does with his arms and everything, and the two women that are the backup dancers, it's all so good.
Even the intro Steve does, everything's dark and he's under a spotlight in the Egyptian garb. He's like, I'd like to talk seriously for just a moment. And his whole intro is just so smartly, it's so Steve Martin, so smartly written.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
It's brilliant.
I'd like to talk seriously just for a moment. One of the great art exhibits ever to tour the United States is the Treasures of Tutankhamun, or King Tut. But I think it's a national disgrace the way we have commercialized it with trinkets and toys, T-shirts and posters. And about 3 months ago, I was up in the woods and I wrote a song. I tried to use the ancient modalities and melodies. I would like to do it for you right now. Maybe we can all learn something from this. King Tut. Now when he was a young man, he never thought he'd see people stand in line to see the boy king. King Tut. How'd you get so funky? Funky Tut. Did you do the monkey? Born in Arizona, moved to Babylonia, King Tut. Now if I'd known they'd line up just to see you, I'd taken all my money and bought me a museum. King Tut. Buried with a donkey. Funky Tut. He's my favorite honky. Born in Arizona, moved to Babylonia, King Tut. Tut, Tut. Dancing by the Nile. Disco Tut, Tut. The ladies love the style. Boss Tut, Tut. Rockin' for a mile. Rockin' Tut, Tut. He ate a crocodile. He gave his life for tourism. Golden idols. He's an Egyptian.
So good.
It's so good.
It's so good.
And the
How many
performance.
times am I going to say that tonight?
I know.
Yeah, there isn't much more that we can add to this that most people don't already know. So what we want to do is reach out and talk to somebody who is actually part of it all.
Yes. Brad, do you want to do the honors?
Love to. We are honored and very excited to have with us original member of the Saturday Night Live band and the man you see in the King Tut performance coming out of the sarcophagus with the saxophone solo, Lou Marini. Lou Marini.
Yeah, that was Belushi's intro, on the live recording. And I remember when we went on tour after those 10 days in LA, the first gig was in Pine Knob, Michigan. And my son was there, and he was like 10 or 11 or 12, something like that. And when Belushi introduced me, people started going, "Blue, Lou, Blue." And at first it sounded like they were booing me, And I remember I looked over at my son, and he had this look on his face like they're booing my dad, But then that's become a thing, man. It's when James Taylor introduces me, I always have a solo in the set somewhere, and he introduces me and I get the big blue, it's turned out to be pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know that most of the folks who listen to our show are familiar with you and your work, but I don't know if they may not know how much you've done and how you are a world-renowned horn player known for saxophone, flute, clarinet, and you're also an accomplished composer and arranger with 3 solo albums?
Actually, there's more, but they're only available in Japan. So, it's like you can't get them.
And in the last 5 decades, you have recorded with some of the biggest names, including Frank Zappa, the Rolling Stones, Lou Reed, Peter Tosh, Eric Clapton, the band, Aerosmith, Ringo Starr, Jimmy Buffett, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, James Taylor. This is incredible, Lou.
And in addition, a member of 2 of my favorite bands, Levon Helm and the RCO All-Stars, as well as, of course, the Blues Brothers.
Well, I've been lucky. It's sort of a Forrest Gump. I look back on it now, I've been in the right place at the right time so many times. And, it's always been word of mouth. Somebody would recommend me for a gig. I did audition a couple of times. I auditioned for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And then I auditioned also for the Saturday Night Live show because I actually wasn't the first saxophone player. The first guy had I don't know whether it was he was late or attitude problems or whatever, but he only lasted a show or 2. And then they had auditions for saxophone players, and a lot of the New York guys went into audition. But I remember when I went to audition at NBC, I really felt somehow that it was my gig, and it turned out to be. And, it took a while before we realized how heavy it was for the rest of the country. But after a while, Alan Rubin, right before the opening theme, he would say to me, "Where's the hippest place to be on earth right now?" And we would go like, "Right here, man, right here."
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it was cool.
So you just auditioned for the show. The word went out that they were auditioning for a new sax player, and that's how you got into it?
Yeah, I think Tom Malone and because Tom and I have a long history of getting each other hired in various gigs, and Alan Rubin too probably said something, so that's why I got called to audition, because I'm not sure that Howard Shore knew me, but it turned out to be a fortuitous thing. Obviously, I probably could have capitalized on it more than I did, but I never really thought about that. I sort of went from band to band. That gigs were always coming up. And also during that time, we were busy in the studios in New York. We were doing jingles and film scores and records.
What was a week like for the band back then when it first started?
We usually, the way it would go is if we had a feature number, or if there was a number that we had to do recording for, we would either go to a rehearsal studio and rehearse, or we would go to, like we used to record at NBC 30th Street, which was a classic, great studio that tons of wonderful records had been done in. And we would go there usually on a Thursday evening. and we would do the recording. And generally, it would only be 2 or 3 hours, sometimes more, but not very often. And then we would be called early Saturday morning, and we would go through whatever tunes or things that we might have to go. And, wow. It didn't happen so much in the later years because it became more self-contained bands. But in the early years, when there was a musical guest, then we would usually be there most of the day, because of camera blocking, sound lighting, everybody getting all their different things together. We would be there for a while, recording or rehearsing whoever the musical guest was.
Well, and also back in those old days too, which I don't think you see at all hardly anymore, is the band would be in sketches or performances a lot, like Madeline Kahn, Lily Tomlin, obviously King Tut, where the host would do a song number with the band backing them up.
Well, every once in a while I'll see a clip or something from one of the things that we did, and I'll be like, oh, wow, I totally forgot about that. But then there's a lot of stuff to remember over the years, I do remember the King Tut thing pretty well, though.
This was a song Steve had already written when he coming to the show. He'd actually recorded it right before he came to the show with the Nitty Gritty Band.
Tom would probably know how it got set up. And it doesn't surprise me that Steve had already figured it out. But I remember that I sort of didn't realize at the time how deep it was going to be for me in particular, because, we rehearsed it and it was funny and we all dug it and we all knew that we were going to be in the bit. But on that Saturday, there were a variety of things that were going on. For one thing, every time I walked in the departure lounge, which was what we called our dressing room for obvious reasons, there was this, the guys would be giggling and like they got caught doing something, And so there was this weird undercurrent going on. And then they called me into makeup, and they told me that I needed to come into makeup early because I was going to have extensive makeup, So we got back from the dinner break, and I go directly into makeup. And man, they did my whole arms, my neck, my chest, my whole face, and it felt horrible, man. It felt horrible,
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask you personally. How was this sketch for you? Because as you're saying, you're the only one with any kind of makeup covered in all that gold. And on top of that, you spend 90% of the song locked in a box.
Yeah. Well, yeah. For one thing, that costume was really heavy. It was like Beverly Sills' costume from Aida or something from the New York Opera. So that thing is weighing down on me. And when we rehearsed it, the girl didn't close the door on me. I finished the solo and stayed there, Mm-hmm. And on the show itself, you could see that I sort of wedged myself back into the coffin, So, what was going on between the guys in the band, what it turned out, the little subterfuge with the band was that they had bought a stink bomb, which they thought they were going to put in the sarcophagus so that when I stepped in there, I would have to come flying out, but then they thought they might lose their gig. So they backed out. They never really did it, but that's what that was about, So I'm dealing with that, with the band, and now the makeup and then the costume. And now I'm in the sarcophagus, and on the sides of the sarcophagus, I can just barely see out the sides, And I'm thinking to myself, how ridiculous I look, And I'm thinking, I came to New York to play jazz, and here I am in a sarcophagus painted in gold paint with a ludicrous costume on, and as I'm looking out at the cats in their Egyptian outfits, I was consoled by the fact that I thought to myself, well, I may look stupid, but they really look stupid. And then, the door opens and it was only Steve and I playing live. The rest of it was to track.
Oh.
So that's a live solo, and Steve's vocal is live, but the rest of the guys, they may have been softly playing when the horn parts came up, but it was all already pre-recorded. And then the girl squashes me back in, It was a crazy night, man.
You can definitely see that when you watch it. There's almost like a pump fake where you weren't ready to go in. And
because I haven't had the chance. I remember being at the 40th anniversary and seeing Lorne, and just as I was he said hello to me, and as I was about to ask him about the King Tut bit, whether he told the girl to shut the door on me, some emergency thing came up and he had to split. So I've never found out. I wonder if he would even remember. But, he used to talk about how the musicians had the 60s. Now it was the comedian's turn to be in the limelight. So I've always wondered if he told that girl, shut the door on him and
put him back in there. Yeah. When you guys were finished and the show was over, was there any sense of how big that was? Like how big that number was that you did?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was week after week, and that cast was so great and so funny that they were knocking us out every week, And in those days too, it was a much looser scene. We played for so many musical guests. Like I remember the Boz Scaggs one. My friends used to call me up and say, I don't know how much you pay the cameraman, but they're always hitting on you, And when we did that Boz Scaggs thing, that flute lick. Well, every time that came up, bing, the camera's on me, and it comes up constantly. And there were so many musical guests that we played with because we were so busy and doing so many things besides the show. I don't think we had a clear idea of how impactful it was to the rest of the country,
Do you remember whose idea it was exactly for the whole sarcophagus gag? Who it was that told you, hey, Lou, for this song, you're going to stand in a box for most of it, and then we're going to pop you out for your solo. Do you remember that all?
No, I'm sorry. I don't, it's one step too far. We need a conclave. Yeah, I'm sure that Cheryl Hardwick, the one female member of the band who was one of the cats, she's a fantastic musician and a fantastic person, but she would probably have some memories of it, and so would Paul.
We're actually talking to Paul next week.
Are you?
Yeah.
We're going to talk to Paul about the cold opening.
Yeah.
He opens the show as Don Kirshner.
I remember that Don Kirshner bit because when I was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, we played the first New Year's Rockin' Eve. And actually, I wrote a medley it was the Allman Brothers Band and Three Dog Night and us. And we were out in some huge sound stage in Long Island, and we had this immense jam, man, with all three bands playing. It was fantastic.
That's awesome.
And that was Don Kirshner. That was the very first one. So I met him then, and so when Paul was doing that bit, we were all cracking up.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, Lou, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
We would be remiss, though, if we didn't ask just one more thing, if you don't mind. We mentioned earlier this episode, you play with John and Dan, backing them up as the Blues Brothers, but they didn't have the band proper at this time. Do you kind of recall all the process from after this show where the Blues Brothers are a hit and Dan and John realize they have something and they pull Paul in and they start pulling the band together? Do you remember kind of the story how you got pulled into the Blues Brothers band?
Yeah, well, it was, I think that Tom and I were considered the horn section, and then Tom suggested getting Alan also. And as far as the way they pulled the band together, I wasn't privy to that. But when we first started rehearsing, we were rehearsing in a studio downtown, and it was sort of open. People were coming in and out, and a lot of showbiz people were coming in to hear the band. And, the band started rehearsing on a Monday without the horns, and Tom was figuring out the charts. And Tuesday, he's basically got most of the charts done. Wednesday, we come in, and the addition of the horns to how good the rhythm section was sounding at that point. By Thursday, we're playing and rehearsing, and we're looking at each other and we're going, for a one-off gig to go out to LA and make some nice bread and play 10 nights, this sounds pretty fucking good. And the reaction to all the people that were coming into the studio to hear the band, they were flipping out, man. They were just flipping out. And then once we got to LA, we were getting standing ovations every night. And I remember like the third or fourth night, I was the outside guy on the horn section closest to the audience. And in the front row, Jack Nicholson was sitting right in the front row. And we were doing B-movie Boxcar Blues. And I looked over at Jack Nicholson, and he caught my eye, and he took his sunglasses and he raised them up and looked at me, and he went, wow, like this, and then put his sunglasses back down. So I sort of knew we had something happening,
That's awesome.
Yeah, the time frame is insane. This performance, King Tut, originally was the end of April, and it was September was that run of shows at the Universal Amphitheater that you guys recorded that first album. So within a span of 4 to 5 months, this one-off on SNL performance, a band is put together. You guys rehearse and record an amazing album.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. No, it was, and the whole thing. And then the next thing, we're making a movie. It was like a rocket ride,
Yeah. Chicken wire. Okay. So it's just going to snowball from here. And
Yeah. But that's one thing. I mentioned those gigs when we were speaking earlier. I mentioned those gigs in Italy. We did a gig in a theater, like a 500-seat theater, and 45 minutes after I sat and signed autographs and CDs and albums for
That's
people.
Awesome.
So. And that was in February. So the impact of the Blues Brothers has been sort of amazing, man. Just amazing. It's taken us all around the world, and we've given a lot of people joy playing. So.
Oh yeah,
pretty cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Lou. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Yeah. So you have a new CD coming out in October, correct?
Yep, it's going to be on La Reserve Records, which is a streaming only label. Very excited about it, and it's a big band record called Out of the Blue. It's 104 minutes worth of music, and I started writing right before the pandemic. I put an all-star big band together of my friends in New York, and I'm really excited about it and very proud of it. So yeah, it's called Out of the Blue, Blue Lou Marini, and the band is called Blue Band.
Nice,
awesome.
That's great.
Cool.
Well, yeah. Thank you again, Lou. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Cats. Been a pleasure.
Appreciate everything.
Straight ahead.
Again, just to kind of give a frame of reference as to how huge this performance is, this song, King Tut, gets released as a single the following week. A single. Didn't exist in the world. He's on SNL. A week later, it's released. It would sell over 1 million copies, hit number 17 on the singles chart for a novelty song.
Yeah. And again, it's something that's totally of the time. We saw a reference to King Tut last week in a sketch. This, right? King Tut was huge at this point in the United States.
And then, later on this year, he records Wild and Crazy Guy.
Yeah.
And this becomes his set closer as he now vaults from tiny, 100 or couple thousand seat theaters to tens of thousand arenas.
Right.
And he now closes his show with King Tut. And then that becomes the closing track on Wild and Crazy Guy that comes out. That would eventually become number 2. His next album, Steve Martin's next comedy album, will become number 2 on the overall Billboard charts.
Right. You just can't comprehend today what that would look like because it doesn't exist.
He's yet to do a movie.
That's true.
That's how big he is.
Yes. Well, he also has been in everything tonight except for Weekend Update.
Yeah, give the man a break.
He finally gets a break in our next sketch, which opens with John and Jane in bed as Harold and Betty. And Jane wakes John up at apparently 3 a.m. to confess having an affair. It turns out it's with Mr. Lampton, their druggist, who's 72 years old. And then John admits to having an affair with a high school kid?
High school cheerleader. Yeah.
And
1978, totally cool. Keep going.
I don't know if it's totally cool, but well, so I had no idea where they were going with this sketch at first, right?
Nope.
And it turns out that they were using, this is their foreplay. This is how they're getting each other into the mood. And you know that because Jane turns to John and goes, "I'm ready. How about you?"
Yeah. Like out of nowhere. Boom. There it is.
I don't know. I liked the turn. I liked where it suddenly made sense.
Yes.
That these affairs were in their imagination. I mean, her with the 72-year-old druggist. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. It wasn't a classic sketch. It's the first non-classic sketch from this episode.
Yeah, it's up against stiff competition this episode. But I agree. I don't know if the reveal hit as strong as they wanted it to.
Right.
And I think part of that might have been, it felt it took a little too long to get there.
Yes.
Because they kind of keep going over and over. And then like they ask for more details from the other one. It goes on a little bit too long. And then, Jane reveals, I remember rubber gloves.
Right.
And then that's what kicks John in. And then they start going at it. I agree. I think Jane is very good. John's fine. Actually, my first note was I was amazed that they put John and Jane in a bed together. Just knowing them and their history.
Right.
It's nice to see the two of them together in something where John's not screaming at her and threatening to hit her.
Right.
And Jane's perfect for this because she plays a middle-aged woman very well.
Yes.
And straight. She plays a middle-aged woman straight very well. Gilda and Lorraine would be more comedic. So for this sketch, she is, I think, perfect.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. Same with John. Like he plays middle-aged man.
He can play the older and restrained guy very well. We haven't seen that in a while. We haven't seen John do subdued in a while. It was fun to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good.
But there's still good lines in it, because they keep egging each other on. And she talks about, she's wearing her house robe. I like this. She goes, underneath of it, naked as a jaybird. And she goes to the pharmacy and he's naked. Yeah. Like a wrinkled jaybird.
Right. Yeah. That was funny.
Right there on the pharmacy floor. He fills out my prescription. And they've got, Jane is very good in this sketch. I think, you're mentioning this is the first non-classic sketch in this episode. I think this is an underrated gem, this sketch. It's well written. It's different.
Yes.
Especially with the people in it. I think it gets overshadowed easily in this episode, but I still think it's pretty good.
Yeah. I think there's just like the writing could have been tweaked a little bit to make it a little better. I think to like raise the stakes in some way. But all in all, I think it worked.
I half thought it was a Marilyn Suzanne Miller piece halfway through.
I thought that too.
It was like kind of serious, the two of them together and talking about infidelities and admitting it. For a minute or two, I thought that might be where it was going. Forgetting, because I haven't watched this in so long.
Yeah.
Speaking of things I like, Gary, I don't mind saying it. I like the next bit.
I have to agree with you. So Lorraine comes on. Yeah. Lorraine comes on to introduce this week's Gary Weiss film, which is Swan Lake. Mm-hmm. But it's a fun take on ballet because the New York City ballerinas are accompanied by the Lockers.
Yeah, we should say when she introduces it that Tony Basil had an idea and went to Gary Weiss. Because when I heard that gave me hope. Because I'm like, they sell this as an idea from Tony Basil. And I held out hope it was going to be good.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I think the performances were good. The way it was cut together was a little whatever. I had problems with some of the edits, but I liked the
I didn't mind that.
I liked the piece overall. The edits were a little sloppy.
I mean, I was taking it as a weighted scale of other Gary Weiss films, and I thought this maybe deserved an award in editing. I thought it was great. Like you said, the combination of the ballet dancers and then the Lockers. And what I thought was really cool then is they finally come together. I was worried they were going to just continually juxtaposition back and forth one from the other. Right. And then when they came together, it really worked. It really worked well watching the two groups together.
Yeah, it was great. And then again, the Lockers those guys are so good.
Yeah.
And so are the ballerinas from the New York City Ballet. They're also amazing.
Yeah, they're fine.
But yes, a very strong Gary Weiss film. Grading it on the curve? Yeah, definitely.
Grading it on a curve. Even just Gary Weiss, top 5 Gary Weiss film. Easily.
I have to agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
Really fun. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. You know what the key to all of this is? An idea by Tony Basil.
Oh, I agree. I agree entirely.
Well, I don't know whose idea the next thing was.
Tom Davis.
Oh, it is Tom Davis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it is it's a very hard to put together sketch at the beginning. It's people in an office building wanting to go to lunch, and then they decide finally to get chili.
Forgot about the intro to this sketch.
The whole setup is a little chaotic.
Right. Going into an elevator.
Yeah. But they all decide to go get chili at the new place, Troffenbrew. And what this is giant troughs of chili that everyone is just eating. They put a bib on over their suits, and then they just eat it with their mouth. And then there's big troughs of beer that they just drink straight from the thing. It's kind of gross.
Is that what the chili's in? That's a trough too, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the trough. I guess the brew's like in a barrel, right? I guess that's more of a barrel.
Yeah, they're like metal barrels.
Yeah.
But there is also a spigot. So it was weird because they'd either go under the spigot or dunk their head into the barrel. They would go both on the beer. It was funny.
I mean, I thought it was funny. It was like, it's absurd, which I enjoyed.
Yes.
And the whole thing, it looks like it was just more fun for the cast to be doing these crazy, absurd things.
I agree. I don't think it's that funny. It's just really, really absurd. The premise is completely ridiculous, which you have to think Steve loved. And that's why this is on the show.
Yeah.
Tom Davis pitches this out to Steve, and Steve listens, and it's so ridiculous and so out there and so silly that Steve Martin's like, we have to do this.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Because like you said, it's a bit thin. There's not a lot. The joke is the set.
Yeah.
The joke is them coming and dipping their head into troughs of chili and trying to conduct business meetings.
Yes.
In this environment, which you asked, this is Tom Davis that said he was inspired by, I think, again, another one short. The week before was out to lunch with Dan Aykroyd at one of these, midtown Manhattan restaurants that cater, to businessmen. And so they find themselves in this, out of their element in this restaurant. And that's what sparked him to write this sketch. and even his original idea, again, in his book, he writes, it was to be even more absurd. The sketch has a pretty funny ending where there's an announcement comes on and everyone has to leave for the half-hour hose down.
Right.
And he originally wanted Gilda and Lorraine, who play the waitresses, to have an actual hose, like a garden hose, and literally just spray everybody down as they walked off. And buzzkill Davey Wilson, the same guy who didn't want to do Attack of the Atomic Lobsters. He was too worried about the water on the floor and too much water in the stage floor. So they dial it back a little bit now. That's why they use those little spray canisters instead, which is still funny.
It's still funny. And they
like a Hudson sprayer right into the face.
Yeah, they sprayed everybody down. And they had fun with that at the end, too. Like Gilda was just spraying. Gilda and the Rain.
Oh, Gilda's having a blast.
It was fun.
Yeah. I know why, but at the time I'm watching this, and my last note on this was, how is this not the 10-1 sketch?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, maybe the chili would have been too cold.
Or is a hard cleanup for the good nights, maybe.
Yeah,
too.
That too.
Because they are. I mean, again, everyone's committed. Everyone's diving face first into the chili and into the beer. So they are a mess at the end of this.
And everyone's in this, and some writers and extras as well. Like there are a lot of people in this restaurant.
Oh yeah, you see Rosie Schuster and Tom Davis as soon as you walk in. You see them in there. Yeah. Funny note to this sketch too. So Steve Martin is a vegetarian. So they had to in that large trough, because there's 7 of them eating out of one big trough. They had to partition it so where Steve's spot would be veggie chili, and he wouldn't get in with all the meat chili. Apparently they had to partition his section off.
Why not just do all veggie chili at that point?
That's too easy.
Yeah.
That's just simple.
Right. Oh, well, you know who would have come up with that idea? The nerds. And we see them at their science fair. So we get a nerd science fair. Bill and Gilda are back. And this time Steve plays Chaz the Spaz.
Steve finally gets his chance to be in the nerd sketch that he missed last time.
Right. Because they originally wanted to do the nerds with him and then pushed it off a week, right? To do it with Robert Klein.
Yeah, it was supposed to be him, and it was supposed to be John and Gilda, and John didn't want to do it, and they ended up pushing it next week, and then, Robert Klein. Robert Klein played Chaz, of all people.
Right.
Or, excuse me, Spaz. I don't think he had a first name.
I think that's right. He was just Spaz, but this is Chaz the Spaz.
They didn't have names. Chaz the Spaz. God damn it, Bill's good in this.
So they're at the science fair. Their project was dialing for toast. So you could dial the phone and that would tell you how dark the toast was. It's absurd. Garrett comes on.
I mean, he is knocking it out of the park this episode.
He was good. He was a lot of fun. He talks about his project. And then Chaz the Spaz comes over, and clearly they do not like each other, Steve and Bill's characters. And I thought Steve was like the perfect foil for Bill.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
This was a really good nerd sketch.
It was just silly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Garrett's whole thing is about his whole project is about static electricity. And they walk over and he grabs two big balloons and starts rubbing them on his chest, yes. Which of course leaves Bill to make jokes about Lisa Lupner. Yeah, and then Steve builds a plutonium bomb.
Yes,
I loved Bill in this sketch. I think this is the one where Bill finally hits on all cylinders as far as Todd. You know, he makes a comment, well, if I had plutonium, I could build this bomb in 5 minutes.
And I believe these are the noogies that you requested a little bit earlier. You inquired about those.
You're not funny, Todd. You know what you could use? A checkup from the neck up.
Hi, Lisa.
Ooh, hi, Charles.
Oh, no. Chaz the Spaz. How's it hanging, Pizza Face? Oh, hello, Spazalopolis. You finally got the nerve to check out the competition, huh? Yeah, I'm really worried about dialing for toast. Not. No offense, Lisa, but your science project leaves something to be desired, mainly a partner. Me.
Well, what's your project, Charles?
Well, nothing special. I just put together a plutonium bomb. That's all. I wanted you to be the first to know.
Oh.
Voila!
Oh, neat, Rudy, Charles.
Ooh, lucky. How did you get the plutonium? None of your beeswax. Well, if I had plutonium, I could have made this bomb in about 5 seconds.
Oh, liar, pants on fire. You don't slow your
Well, guess what else is on fire? Your shirt. Oh, now it's out. Now it's out. Oh, tickle machine out of control. Tickle machine is out of control. Heck, your age, not your shoe size. I think I feel like some toast. Yes, toast operator. Yeah, this is Todd Labana. Can you give me some lighter, please? Yeah, Mr. Labana is holding.
Mom! Hey, kids!
Hello, Mrs. Lupner.
The biggest laugh I had of this whole sketch is Todd and Lisa walk over to Chaz's booth to see the bomb that he's looking at, and he whips the cover off and there's a bomb and they're holding it. And then at the end, Steve puts it back down its little base and they turn to walk away. And Bill says, in perfect Bill Murray, I think I feel like some toast. And as he turns, he just like flips the bomb up so it falls off. That was the biggest laugh I had of this whole thing, was classic Bill Murray delivery with a little flick as he just turned and walked away and Steve tries to catch the bomb. Hilarious.
Yeah, it was really good. I think you're right. Like he's locked in on Todd now.
This is the one.
Yeah.
This was the one. But yeah, just silly. It's, I think Thomas mentioned it, in his episode, that they're maybe not always the funniest sketches, but they're just fun and enjoyable to watch.
Right.
I remember that watching this because it's not the greatest written sketch. It's just silly and fun. Did you notice at the end of the sketch, even when they panned up to the woman in the stands, like she didn't seem that thrilled?
Yeah. She like had her chin in her hand.
Because it was like, it was just a fun sketch.
Right.
But this is another example, just like the Festrunk Brothers, is these characters have now, I think they're all locked in.
Yeah.
And they're firing on all cylinders.
Definitely.
It's really good.
Well, I think you could argue that the Blues Brothers are not yet firing on all cylinders, but they're still really damn good. They come on and they perform I Don't Know. It's the Willie Maybon song.
Also done by Cripple Clarence Lofton.
Yeah, this is another solid performance.
Paul's back, which I noticed because the piano was very loud in the mix. I noticed.
Oh, really?
First. I could tell. I was looking to see Paul in it, and then I was like, damn, that piano's loud.
Again, this is they're bringing their energy. John's bringing his energy, selling this.
Yeah. It's a bit more of an act than the first song. Like, you had mentioned the first song was like a legit blues number, which this is as well. But this is a bit more of, there's that spoken interval at the end where it kind of leans more towards comedy than it does towards the music.
Well, the way he performs it, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is a number that when they play it later with the band that they put together, it definitely,
yes,
like, because this song, much more than Hey Bartender, this song relies on the music.
John fronts the band.
Right.
When they have the band together, there's a lot more of the band interplay during that speaking part. This time, the band pretty much just went silent and he just did it kind of all by himself.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely more of an energy and more of a back and forth for it.
Yeah. But they're playing with a band that it's just the house band for Saturday Night Live.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah. So how then did they get to become the musical guests with the house band?
You know, I haven't been able, this is something that's always kind of bothered me and I haven't been able to figure it out because the popular story that goes around that I think you read about the most is that, and I don't know if Dan says it this way in his Audible thing or not, but the story goes around that they thought that they were short this week. They had run through the episode and they were short, and Lauren said, okay, go ahead. You guys can play. You guys can do your number, which I don't buy for a few reasons. One, they play 2 songs.
Right.
It's like if they were short, they wouldn't get 2. They're announced as the special guests the week prior.
Right.
And we could talk about later. If they were running short, they actually had sketches they didn't use, including a Nick the Lounge Singer sketch this week. So my 2 cents, for whatever it's worth, is, we said they have been warming up the audience up to this point. John and Dan have been putting somewhat of an act together. And I feel like there's some way where John basically said, we're doing this. Remember, John, we talked about it recently. He's already left the show 3 times to do movies. He's starting to become big. We've mentioned he was complaining since season 1. Why can't the cast do musical numbers? I feel there's a battle of egos and push and shove. And I feel like that's had to play into it somewhat. Because it's the end of the season too. It's the end of the season. John's starting to do movies.
Right.
He's starting to become more popular. I think they might have needed to give him something to make him happy. Could be wrong.
Right.
But that's my take on it.
But he puts himself all in on this performance. Like he does doing cartwheels and trying to keep the crowd into it. And, he totally is committed to the Blues Brothers at this point, and you can see it in this performance.
Yeah, which he always was. I think that's the thing. When they first showed up, no one knew what to expect. And now we've heard the story told so many times, like you understand, like, yeah, he was committed to the band, to the music. He does interviews where people have questioned why they were doing it or if it's real. And like he gets pissed off about it. So this is the start of it. And as you said, they will get better. Once they have an actual band of their own, they just get so much better. This performance, yes, a little bit weaker, not a lot there. You can tell they spent more time on Hey Bartender. He knew that one pretty well.
Right. But they're definitely laying the foundation, letting the general public know, like, hey, this is a thing that we do. So buckle up.
I mean, Dan claims that they got the offer to record the album literally this night after these performances.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very similar to the way it was done in the movie. The same guy, Michael Kleffner, who was an executive at Atlantic Records. Dan tells the story that after this episode that they went over so well, they got a 1-record deal right after this.
All right. I believe
how true, but I mean, we talked with Paul about the time frame from tonight to the time they record that album. So it had to happen fast.
Yeah. Well, we're almost through this classic episode of SNL, and it ends with the TV show Next Week in Review, hosted by Maxine Universe, played by Lorraine, and Dan, Jane, and Steve are her guests. And they basically are just making predictions about the next week. Not basically. That is what they're doing.
Well, it's not predictions because they know.
Because they know. Right. They're telling us what's going to happen next week.
Yes, they're telling us what's going to happen next week.
This felt like a 10-1 sketch.
This answered my question as to why Troffenbrew was not 10-1 when I remembered this sketch. Yeah, I mean, I was excited to see Lorraine with something big to do tonight because she hasn't really done much other than play dead and introduce Gary Weiss.
Yeah.
And play a fox, I guess. But, she had meaty role. And Jane is like so bizarre as one of the guests.
I mean, yeah, they all are. Dan is too. I think you're just not used to seeing Jane as this bizarre weirdo. Like usually that's a Lorraine,
which I actually liked.
Yeah.
I liked the fact that it was, again, it's a talk show and Lorraine takes the straight role as the host and Jane plays the weird guest. Cause 9 times out of 10, you're getting Jane Curtin, talk show host, handling these guests. So it was a very cool change. I liked it actually.
Yeah. It was okay. I liked, the funniest bit to me really was when Lorraine says, all right, we'll see you next week. And Steve's like,
yes,
I don't know that will happen.
I'm not so sure of that, Maxine.
Yeah.
Yeah, they saved the best joke for last. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because they're all talking about what the next week's story is going to be. Dan says a nuclear dump disappearing.
Right.
Jane says the Debbie Boone kidnapping. And then Steve comes in and says Pope cloning. A little too weird for me, this sketch, I'm going to admit. I've never been a fan. Like, I always forget this is part of this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair.
I mean, by the end, I think Dan just drops his character and plays Dan.
Well,
because he starts talking about the dump and what's going to happen. He just starts spouting all these facts, and he kind of had this like weird mystical vibe to him. And at some point that goes away and he's just Dan Aykroyd spouting all. It was like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
But that's it. And then we go to our good nights, which is just a very quick from Steve. He again does his like, I'd like to thank the whole cast, blah, blah, blah.
I don't know. There's something about it's endearing. Like, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm willing this onto it,
yeah.
But it just feels like he genuinely was like happy and was grateful. Yeah. It just, I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just reading more into it.
I don't know. Maybe that's okay. But this is, just such an amazing episode. Really. We've said it 100 times already.
All-time classic.
Yeah, we can't say it enough.
I'd put this up against anything. Any other episode, any other era, I put this up against.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much fun.
Great sketches, classic moments, iconic moments. You're going to laugh at this. Legendary musical act. I mean, the act themselves aren't huge, but how many other acts from this time period would go on to have the impact over the next 40, 50 years that the Blues Brothers would? Movies made about them. Conventions happening now about them. They're still in the pop culture 45 years later.
The zeitgeist.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just one of those nights where just everything was clicking. The writing's great. All the performances are great. Garrett's on.
Poor Garrett. Lay off Garrett.
I'm just saying it added to the greatness.
No, I think that's also true though. Like everyone is in this.
No,
like you said, Lorraine probably had the lightest lift of anyone. But everyone is in a few sketches. Everyone's in something, and they're all playing together.
And they're all nice. Well. Everybody's performance is well. Even if you didn't love a particular sketch or something, everybody's very good in their roles.
Yeah. I think this episode, for me, just highlighted how incredible Dan is as a sketch performer. And he can go from character to character and do it so well. And then play in the band and play a harmonica solo.
Yeah.
But it also highlighted Steve's strength. Like Steve's not a sketch performer and he's in a lot this episode and he does really well.
He's so good in Festrunk.
He's so good in Festrunk. Good. But to your point, even next week in review, he's solid. It's not the best written sketch, but he's really good. The Nerds, like as Chaz the Spaz, I'm just incredible performance by the host.
Yeah, he's very good as Chaz. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good job.
Yeah.
We talk about how great this episode was. A couple of sketches apparently that were written that didn't make it. I mentioned it earlier. One apparently is they were working on a Nick the Lounge Singer sketch that they're writing. Nick Springs that he sings in the Poconos. It gets pushed, so we'll see it next week when Richard Dreyfuss hosts. So that's what. But could you imagine this episode and you have a Nick the Lounge Singer in there somewhere?
Right. If you had Nick the Lounge Singer instead of Next Week in Review or even Trough and Brew or even Love Story, whatever. But yeah,
just in that mix somewhere. Even if you took the second Blues Brothers number out and gave it Nick the Lounge Singer, that
would be amazing.
And the other one was, I think it's called Tattoo Parlor. And it was Dan and Lorraine playing their hippie characters, Jason and Chloe, I think it is. And Steve was like an idiot customer who comes in to get a tattoo and they get stoned beforehand. And of course I hear that and I'm like, they would have dropped the cow. We could have had a season 3 dropping the cow. That just would have put this above and beyond. But yeah, so I mean, there's still like quality stuff that didn't even make the episode.
Yeah.
That's how good this is.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, and maybe because of it being the third week in a row, the third of 3 shows, and they know they have 2 weeks off or more, 2 or 3 weeks off. I guess it's 3 weeks off.
I think you're right. Third in a row. Steve Martin's back for his 3rd time. So you know it's got to be something big. If you're bringing him back for a 3rd time, you've got to deliver.
Right.
End of the season, they know they only got 2 more episodes left. So, and I think they know, I'm guessing they know they got Dreyfuss coming. So they're probably a little bit suspect on how that goes. So it's, here's Steve. We got Dreyfus and Buck left. So let's start delivering.
Yeah.
And they do.
Right.
This week, from writing to costumes to sets to performances, is just everybody knocking it out of the park.
So good. Well, Brad, that means that it's going to be really hard for you when I say, what are your best bits?
It is hard, but I go with Festrunk Brothers, Theodoric of York, Dancing in the Dark, and I put the cold open of Hey Bartender in there. I got 4. I'm going 4.
I'm going to go.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No. Look, the only thing I would argue with you is if you told me that Troffenbrew or Next Week in Review. Everything else is on the table.
Okay.
I agree with 3 of yours. I agree with Festrunk Brothers.
Yeah.
Dancing in the Dark. Theodoric of York. Theodoric of York is probably like my 1A of these 4 ones. And then my 4th is the Nerds sketch. I just really liked Steve in this one. Like Steve's presence as I said, Bill's foil, I really worked for me.
Yeah, it's fair. It's good. It's a very good. It's the best Nerds we've seen by far.
Yes. And
it's probably, I think, I was not remembering all, it's definitely a top 3 of all time Nerds.
But again, I don't think you can argue, like I can't argue with you on that cold open. That was wonderful. And that was,
I mean, listen,
historic.
You got to watch this top to bottom. There's not bits in this one. You got to watch this entire episode. It's just, you have to watch the whole thing.
This episode is definitely, you can't shortchange this.
No. You finish, I mean, we have a lot of best bits. You finish this era, these first 5 years, this Festrunk Brothers, Theodoric of York, and Dancing in the Dark will all be top 10 sketches.
Yeah. And neither of us included King Tut, which is remarkable. Yeah. Maybe we need to do 5. Right. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. No, oh, geez. How the fuck did we not do that?
Right.
That's just how good the cast is.
That's everything in this is so good. I mean, we're even talking about an excellent Gary Weiss film. So,
so good. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's good. This was a great show. We should thank Paul Schaefer, Lou Marini, and Marilyn Suzanne Miller for talking to us about this show.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
You're very fortunate to have them. Next week, we'll be talking about season 3, episode 19 with host Richard Dreyfuss and
Richard Dreyfuss is going to be on the podcast?
Yes.
Is this like a weekly thing now? We should prepare ourselves for this?
Yeah. You shouldn't. Richard Dreyfuss and I talked about it. We don't. That's why you didn't know.
Dreyfuss.
With musical guests Jimmy Buffett and Gary Tigerman.
Alrighty.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
And have a pleasant tomorrow.
I said, woman, are you going to walk a mile for a camel? Or are you going to make like Mr. Chesterfield and satisfied? Well, she said, that all depends on what you're packing. Regular or king size. I said, well, now, baby. Now what you got to say, baby? She said...
The Not Ready for Primetime podcast is a 2 Pints Productions production. Produced and edited by Brad and Gary. Thought about by Brad and Gary. Please rate and review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.